The Where Our Minds Wander podcast may contain sensitive content and explicit language. Listener discretion is advised.
Greetings, fellow wanderers, to the places our minds wander.
Where strange lights speed beyond reason across a clear night sky.
The house at the end of the road where disembodied voices whisper and strange noises make the living shiver.
Lurking shadows hiding on the edge of the woods just outside your back door.
Odd, true events throughout time that lead you down the rabbit hole. I'm Wes.
And I'm Beth.
And this is Where Our Minds Wander. Hello and welcome to Our Minds Wander, all you fellow wanderers. I'm Wes, and that's my wife and co-host, Beth.
Hello, everyone.
You know, Beth, with Halloween coming up, it brought back memories of going trick-or-treating with the kids. You know, the whole build-up before deciding what they were going to dress up as and such.
Mm-hmm.
It was so much fun seeing all the little kids out in their costumes and coming home seeing what candy everyone got.
And the wheeling and dealing to trade for what they really wanted.
Right. But now they're like 14 and older and they just think they're too old to go, which is kind of sad. So being the curious person that I am, I Googled at what age should you stop trick-or-treating? And I was surprised that most sites said 14. And also I found out that in some states, it's against the law to trick-or-treat 14 or over. And that's pretty ridiculous.
It is. I trick-or-treated till I was at least 17, if not 18.
Yeah, I mean, how are they going to know? I mean, who's checking IDs anyways? I just found it so strange, you know?
You're taller than me. Let me see your ID.
Right. So with that said, what spooky topic did you come up with for tonight's story?
Well, I know that this time of year, there are quite a few parents out there that are doing the whole college tour thing. So I was thinking of them when I researched this story.
Oh, how nice of you.
I know. And it's quite possible that every college campus in the world has its own ghost stories. It's kind of inevitable. You put hundreds of kids together, in some cases relatively old buildings, away from home for the first time, and their imaginations may get the better of them, especially if they stay up late studying or go take their showers at like 11 p.m. when the bathrooms are mostly empty. They hear water gushing through faulty pipes or see lights flickering, and they don't automatically think that someone may be shorting out a breaker, but that ghosts might be lurking about. My dorm, which was the oldest building on my college campus, was supposedly haunted. First of all, it looked old. Entirely made of red brick with white pillars in the front and dormers along the second floor roofline, it seemed like it hadn't changed a bit since the 1800s. I had a friend who lived on the top floor, and she swore that one time when she got home late at night, all her furniture was rearranged and that she had never, ever given her door code to anyone. She also said she'd hear footsteps over her head. I had heard the tales of Mortimer. He was the butler of the wealthy family who owned my dormitory hall back when it was a single residence. Mortimer allegedly killed a young girl and bricked her up in the attic, that same attic that my friend claimed she heard those footsteps coming from.
Wow, that seems pretty far-fetched.
Well, yes, especially since my dorm was never a single-family home.
Right, but kids at that age, I can see them believing something like that.
Right, and I remember asking an upperclassman once about the ghosts in McDonough Hall, and he informed me that the whole Mortimer thing was totally made up. But he said in complete seriousness that my dorm was once a boys' school back in the 1800s, and there had been a fire. The noises were probably the ghosts of the boys that had died. The only problem with that is my dorm wasn't even built until 1951, and there had never been another building where it stood. So yes, ghost stories abound on college campuses. But what if you truly thought your dorm was haunted and you discovered that your dorm was actually on top of a crypt containing 232 nuns.
Well, that's creepy for sure. You think of nuns being nice and wholesome, but some of those Catholic school nuns were downright mean and strict.
They could be.
They could wield that ruler.
They could. And what if you knew that the building had also actually barely survived a fire where at least 50 orphaned children had died?
Okay, that would get my attention.
You might hear some things that you couldn't explain, right?
Yeah, I'm thinking so.
Yeah, I'm talking about the Grey Nuns Motherhouse at Concordia University in Montreal, Canada. The Sisters of Charity of Montreal, better known as the Grey Nuns, began on December 31st, 1734, when Marguerite de Youville, the widow of a bootlegger, how cool is that?
That's very cool.
And 3 other women vowed to commit themselves to caring for those in need of medical or social services in New France. At first, de Youville and her followers took over the derelict General Hospital in Montreal's Old Port. But de Youville had grand ideas of expansion. Even though she died in 1771, her plans were realized, and the Grey Nuns expanded across Canada and into the U.S. by the mid-1800s. By the 1860s, the General Hospital building wasn't faring too well because of the constant flooding of the nearby St. Lawrence River. So, the Grey Nuns hired architect Victor Bourgeot to build a new mother house at the intersection of Guy Street and René Lévesque Boulevard. The first wing opened in 1871. So, this is a Gothic-y looking building that really is old. The mother house was a self-sustaining city within itself. The nuns offered medical services to anyone who came to the door, and they also ran workshops where they sewed vestments, made wax figurines and candles, and they made wafers for mass services. In addition to that, they had their own printing presses and a bindery where they produced their own leaflets and books, as well as taking on commissions.
Boy, they were busy.
They were very busy. In the community hall, they gathered for meetings and also watched movies and put on performances.
Like Sister Act?
I don't think so.
Perhaps not, yeah.
No, I don't think so. But they did offer shelter and services to homeless women, as well as women and children who were seeking safety from domestic abuse. They had a wing specifically for men who needed medical services or a hot meal and a warm bed. Part of the massive building was also used as an orphanage. In 1905, the Grey Nuns began to offer classes in traditional domestic work, like housekeeping, dressmaking, childcare, and cooking. But they also offered advanced courses in psychology, anatomy, and French. They began one of the first nursing programs in French. So they were pretty darn amazing.
That is pretty cool. Why, they should offer classes like that today.
What a novel idea. Colleges should offer courses like that today.
Cooking, cleaning, yes. Would come in very handy.
And the building itself is amazing. It's a giant H shape made of stone in the neoclassical and Romanesque revival style. Most of the building is 4 stories tall, although the west wing is 5 stories. It also has an octagonal tower and spire. The chapel, which is pretty much exactly the same as it was back in the 1800s, except the pews have been replaced by long tables, is a silent place to study for up to 230 Concordia students at once. It's really, really gorgeous, with a vaulted ceiling, gold pillars, religious paintings, and pristine white walls. The area surrounding the mother house had several outbuildings as well as gardens and statues, and is bordered on its 4 sides by Guy Street, René Lévesque, St. Catherine, and St. Matthew. It was purchased by Concordia University in 2004 and converted into a co-ed residence hall for 600 students. There are 14 group study rooms, a daycare facility, and a cafeteria.
This place is massive.
It's massive. And underneath it all is the original crypt, containing 276 people, 232 of whom were Grey Nuns. Right underneath it.
That's creepy.
Students and faculty cannot enter the crypt. Only existing members of the Grey Nuns can. But they can see it through a window in a permanently locked door. It doesn't look like you'd expect when you hear the word crypt. There aren't any stone walls or stone vaults. Instead, there are rows of narrow coffin-shaped plots recessed right into the floor. Each one of these coffin shapes is filled with what looks like light gray or white pebbles. Surrounding them is darker pebbles or some sort of compressed gravel. At the head of each one of these plots is a wooden cross bearing each nun's name and birth and death dates. Many of the nuns from the 1800s seem to have lived about 40 to 50 years, but there are a few in their 20s. So, yeah, it doesn't look at all what you would expect when you hear that word crypt. It looks more like a basement with graves in it, which makes it just as unnerving.
Nevertheless, I would love to see it in person.
I would too. So initially, when Concordia purchased the Mother House, the bodies were going to be transferred to St. Bernard, another site operated by the Grey Nuns. However, the health department would not allow it, as many of the nuns interred there had died from infectious diseases. And so they remain. And so many of Concordia's students have tales to tell of strange noises, apparitions, and shadow figures. Not just of nuns, but of victims of a horrible fire that took place on Valentine's Day in 1918.
That would be unnerving.
Yeah, the top floor of the West Wing was an orphanage in 1918, and on that day, soldiers who were recuperating in the Mother House hospital on lower floors and firemen who arrived on scene were unable to rescue 53 people, many of them infants. When I looked at photos online, it was pretty awful. A good portion of the building was just engulfed in fire. Nowadays, there is a daycare in part of the Mother House building, and apparently it's quite common to see groups of children acting as if they are playing with someone invisible. That might not seem strange. They're just kids playing with an imaginary friend. Except the children all tend to describe their invisible playmates in one of three ways. They either describe a young boy about their age with blackened clothes, or they describe women wearing the same white hats and same white collars and same dresses, or they say it is a man in tattered clothes with burnt skin.
Oh, I believe these kids are definitely seeing something.
Yeah, for sure. Resident students report hearing unexplained children's screams, along with the sound of trampling, running feet from the floor above them, even when the majority of rooms above are known to be vacant. But they also claim to hear the chanting of voices, like those of nuns in prayer, just as often, in places where it was relatively silent just seconds before.
Oh, I'd love to go there and do some EVP sessions.
That would be interesting. You'd have to get all of those kids out of there, though, so you didn't have any sort of contamination.
Yeah, but it'd be cool to go down to where the door is and do some EVP sessions there also.
Yeah, that's true. With 600 students in a single building, though, you might say that it's just a bunch of them playing a prank. But it seems as though many of the students don't even know the history of the building, and especially not the fire. And there really isn't any way to explain those daycare children all having similar imaginary friends.
Well, it's sad to say, but I find that most people don't bother to find the history of some of the places where they live or visit. As soon as I plan to go any place, I start researching the history as best as possible. That goes for the houses I've lived in also. I like to know what may have taken place over time. You never know what you're going to find, some kind of mind-boggling information that you just had no clue about. That's
true. And I don't think in this case that it should deter students from living there. I mean, the fire was tragic. But if you look at the overall history of the building and the intent behind it, it was always meant to be a place for taking care of people and educating people and looking out for people. and none of the spirits seem like they want to hurt anyone. It's actually the opposite. It's almost like they're still trying their best to care for everyone who goes through its halls.
Yeah, it sounds that way. Except for maybe those Catholic school nuns that smack you with rulers.
Hey, did you know? Theodore Hook may have had a score to settle in 1810. All was normal on Berner Street, London that November at the Tottenham House. A chimney sweep rang the bell and said he was there to do some work. Except no one at the home requested that the chimneys be swept. He was sent away. But then another chimney sweep showed up, and another, and another. Then a coal cart arrived, ready to unload. He had not been summoned either, and was sent off. Then the cake maker arrived. Then a handful of doctors, one by one, followed by surgeons. Priests and ministers arrived next, insisting someone had called for them. Over 1,000 tradesmen of various types knocked on the Tottenham's door that day, including a piano maker with not one, but 12 pianos. Then, to cap it all off, came the undertakers with their coffins. No one knows why Theodore Hook had it out for the Tottenhams, or if he just randomly picked their home for the greatest prank in history. Who'da thunk it? So, what sort of spooky story did you come across for us this week?
Well, I love European castles. To have castles that are still around from like the 12th century is just mind-boggling to me. You can only imagine what it was really like to live in them, and my mind wanders to all the tragedy and happiness that was had inside the walls and on the ground they sit on. Now, when you think of the U.S., you really don't think of castles.
No, not really.
But we do have many castles which are primarily from the 19th century, so nowhere near as old. But that doesn't take away from their grandeur and their interesting stories, their histories behind them. So, with that said, maybe you kind of have a feeling where I'm going with my stories tonight.
To a castle, I hope. Or else that entire buildup was just really mean.
Yeah, I'm known for that. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of castles in the world, many which are considered haunted. We've done episodes on a few of them, but what if I told you there are 2 castles in the United States that could possibly be contenders for the most haunted title?
Well, then I'd want to hear about them.
Good, because I'm taking us to the Henderson Castle in Kalamazoo, Michigan, and then to the Franklin Castle in Cleveland, Ohio. And let's see if you agree with me.
Alrighty.
Henderson Castle, a massive Queen Anne-style mansion built of sandstone and brick, was built in 1885 on West Main Hill overlooking Kalamazoo. It cost $72,000 to build, which was quite the chunk of change in 1895, and featured 25 rooms, including 7 bathrooms.
Wow. No waiting.
Not at all.
Not with 7
no
bathrooms.
Waiting. You'd be in heaven there.
I would. I might even pick one depending on my mood.
Yeah, I could see that. Each ornate and stunning room contains mahogany, bird's eye maple, quartered oak, birch, and American sycamore. It's everything you would expect in an 1895 Victorian home, other than it looks more like a castle than a mansion, with its 3-story turret, multiple peaked roofline, and curved open porch. Frank Henderson, a Freemason, was the owner and president of the Henderson Ames Company, which supplied uniforms to the Army. The company also specialized in regalia for various secret societies and fraternal organizations.
Oh, that's cool.
Mary Henderson, his wife, had inherited a plot of land on the western edge of Kalamazoo, and Mr. Henderson dreamt of creating a grand suburb. In 1888, he hired surveyors, engineers, and landscape architects to plot the suburb and create Kalamazoo's first natural site plan. In 1890, Mr. Henderson was ready to build his home in this new planned residential district. When his castle was completed in 1895, the Hendersons hosted a grand housewarming party. Mr. Henderson died in 1899, and Mary remained in the castle until she died in 1907. The Hendersons' children inherited the castle at this point, and they held on to it until 1919. But then it changed hands quite a bit. In fact, 10 owners have operated the property since then. The first new owner was Bertrand Hopper, president and treasurer of the Kalamazoo Stationery Company. He lived there through the 1920s, and then the house stood vacant for several years until it was purchased in 1945 by William Stoofbergen, who divided the home into separate apartments. He lived there with his own family in one of the units, renting out the rest. In 1957, the house was deeded to the First National Bank and then taken over by Kalamazoo College, a liberal arts school. In 1975, a Dr. Jess Walker purchased the castle and began converting it back into a single-family home, which was continued by Frederick Royce, who bought the home in 1981. He ran it as a bed and breakfast and sold the castle in 2005 to another couple. In 2010, it was sold yet again. And then only a year later, the castle changed hands yet another time to master French chef Francois Moyer, who opened a fine French restaurant on the premises. So it's been through many renovations and many owners, which, can stir up activity.
Definitely.
And there has reportedly been quite a bit of activity. If we start in the kitchen, there is a crossbeam that has some sort of illegible writing or markings scratched into it. Despite being repaired numerous times, the markings always reappear. There is a cabinet that stands between Mary and Frank's bedrooms that would continuously open. During one renovation, workers discovered a jewelry box under the floorboards between the two rooms. When they removed the box, the cabinet door no longer opened.
Interesting.
A number of EVPs have been caught in the castle by paranormal investigators, including a hay and flowers and candy. One of the previous owner's children claimed that a woman in Victorian-era dress was standing in Mary Henderson's former dressing room. Past employees also reported seeing a woman in a Victorian gown standing on the stairs numerous times. And on one occasion, after leaving the scullery to go into the dining room and returning moments later, all of the scullery cabinet doors, which are 12 to 15 feet in the air, were open.
Yikes.
But guests have also had encounters. There was one guest staying in the Dutch room who claimed she was awoken in the middle of the night by something tapping her arm. She couldn't see a thing in the pitch-dark room, but heard a woman's voice clearly say, "Go away."
Oh.
Another said she constantly felt something passing by her on the stairs each time she went up or down. So who exactly is haunting the Henderson Castle? Mediums who have visited the property believe that there are several ghosts, including a young girl who was credited as causing the marks in that kitchen beam. The medium felt that a little girl was up on scaffolding and fell. They also say a soldier inhabits the house, who served with the Henderson's son during the Spanish-American War. Frank and Mary Henderson are there, Mary being the woman in the Victorian gown who has been seen so frequently, and they even say there is a small dog that still roams the floors. So it sounds to me as though most of the spirits still lingering at the castle may be residual. They are just continuing their daily routines and making sure their work gets done. But there are a couple who do seem intelligent, speaking to those who ask questions, and to some guests who are just sleeping.
That's a way to be woken up.
So what do you think? Contender for the most haunted title?
It could be, as far as American castles go, but I'm sorry, honey, it doesn't sound super spooky.
Okay, well, I have another one lined up for you.
Oh, cool.
On the day the new family moved into the Franklin Castle in Cleveland, Ohio, 2 of the 6 children ran to their mother to say there was a young girl in white on the 3rd floor. The girl was crying and they were concerned. When their mother went up to check, there was no one there. 2 of the older children often awoke in the middle of the night to their blankets being yanked off them.
Accounts like that are always freaky to me. I don't like the idea of that at all.
The mother herself once woke up on the bedroom floor screaming. She swore that there was someone on the floor beside her, screaming right along with her. They were scared enough to perform several exorcisms, but it didn't help. They sold this castle and moved out in 1974. So Franklin Castle in Cleveland, Ohio, has had a lot of attention. People have also told stories about this 1881 Victorian mansion for decades, from murderers to Nazi spies to bootlegging in the tunnels beneath the castle. Sorting through what's true and what's blatant fabrication was interesting, and yet it doesn't take away from the hauntings that are said to have taken place there once you weed out the wild rumors. Franklin Castle was built by Heinz Tiedemann, a German immigrant who made his money as a grocer and later a banker. The stone mansion has over 20 rooms, is 4 stories high, and has 80 windows.
I would not want to have to clean those.
It was his hope to offer rooms in the castle to fellow German immigrants who had recently arrived in Cleveland. From what I can tell, the castle has been under restoration for years, and although you can see how grand the castle must have once been, some of it's currently in pretty rough shape. Shortly after moving in, Haynes and Louisa's daughter, Emma, passed away at age 15. Then his mother died, and by 1888, the Tiedemans lost 3 more children. To combat Louisa's grief, Haynes had a ballroom built in the castle, and in 1895, Louise passed away as well.
Jeez, that's a lot.
Shortly after his wife died, Haynes sold the castle to a German family, who in 1921 sold it to the German American League for Culture, which in its early years functioned more as a meeting place for the German Socialist Party, as far as I can figure out. This is where the Nazi spy rumors begin, that spies were either gathering or living there, although I couldn't find any proof of this. The German American Culture League owned the property until 1968 and functioned for part of that time as the German Singing Club. Regardless, a secret room was discovered in the castle by the front door. A sliding panel revealed a cache of Prohibition-era liquor and socialist propaganda. So it's certainly ironic that Haynes built the home with the hopes of helping out fellow immigrants, making the most of the American dream, and then the castle was owned by Nazis. But anyways, the discovery of this room also led to the rumors that the castle was being used as a bootlegger's hideout, and they used the tunnels under the house to move their stash. Except, there aren't any tunnels underneath the house.
Aha. So that would make it rather difficult.
Correct. The real tales of the haunting began right after the family with 6 children that I mentioned at the top of my story bought the castle from the German American Culture League. Their stories are supposedly true, and I can't help but wonder if the little girl in white might possibly be Emma Tiedemann, and the woman screaming on the floor was Louise. She experienced the deaths of 4 of her children in a very short period of time. I don't think it's too far-fetched to think it was her spirit overcome with residual grief.
Especially since the new family had 6 children. And if she had lost so many of hers, it makes sense that maybe
she warmed right up to him.
Yeah.
After that, the family moved out in 1974. The house was then on the market over and over, passing from one owner to the next. Mickey Deans, Judy Garland's 5th husband, owned the castle for over a decade. So after he sold it in 1999, an arsonist set fire to it, causing extensive damage, which I just find disgusting.
It is disgusting.
Subsequent owners have tried to restore the home, but like I said, from what I can see from the pictures online, that's been an understandably slow and expensive endeavor.
I can imagine.
So despite all the made-up stories about the castle, there is some real paranormal stuff going on there, in addition to the 2 events I mentioned already. Quite often, people report seeing a woman in black looking out the window or catching sight of her just out of the corner of their eye. The young girl in white is often heard crying, but at other times, she's heard giggling as she runs up and down the stairs. Footsteps are often heard crossing the ballroom floor above when people know there is no one upstairs. Doors open and shut on their own, and there are disembodied voices, muffled, coming from empty rooms. objects also tend to move. For example, when something is put down on, say, a table, and you come back for it later, it's not there. And you might find it in a completely different room on an entirely different floor of the mansion days later, according to one account that I found.
That's creepy.
The most obvious choices for who could be haunting the Franklin Castle are, of course, Louise and her daughter Emma. With all the nasty rumors that people have created about the Franklin Castle, for example, people even went so far as to claim that Haynes murdered his family, which is just ridiculous and so disrespectful.
Are you serious? That's what they said about him?
Yep.
Wow.
Or perhaps they were truly happy for a while in the beautiful home that Haynes built for all of them, and that's just where they have chosen to stay. So what do you think? Most haunted castle in America?
Quite possibly. The stuff that one family went through sounds really frightening. Like I said before, I do not like the idea of covers being yanked off by something that you can't see. But that house has seen some really interesting characters within its walls, that's for sure.
Yes, it has. And I wish whoever is currently trying to restore the home all the best for what it's worth. I appreciate everything they're trying to do because it was a beautiful home, and it really makes me happy when people appreciate and honor the true history of homes like this.
Yeah, me too. I think it needs to be done more, that people need to honor the real history of their homes. And sometimes people are like, well, nothing all that interesting happened here. And it doesn't matter. If a home's been there for 100 years, just honor that it's been there for 100 years.
When so many of these old homes that you see that they're too big and people don't want to purchase them, to see them just bulldozed over, I find sickening.
It's so sad.
I'd rather that people turn them into apartments than
right. And then
demolish them.
And then down the line, if somebody purchases it with enough money, they can convert it back to what it was.
That's true. At least it's still standing.
Yeah.
And the history is still preserved. I guess that about wraps it up for this week's episode.
Yeah, and we'll see you next week for an all-new episode of Where Our Minds Wander.
See you soon.
Thank you for joining us. We look forward to traveling with you again to the places where our minds wander.
If you like what you heard, please take a moment and provide us with a 5-star rating and a comment. It really helps us move up the list so people can find us.
See you next week for an all-new episode of Where Our Minds Wander.